What's up, geeks and gamers? So, you think you know the Zelda timeline? I mean, it's right there in the Hyrule Historia for anyone to read, right? But what if I told you that Nintendo had lied to you? That's right, viewers, the timeline in the Hyrule Historia is a fake. A deliberate lie by Nintendo meant to throw us off the trail of the real timeline. Today we're going to take a closer look at the quote-unquote official timeline and reveal the secret Nintendo doesn't want you to know. Oh, and in case it wasn't obvious, spoilers ahead for pretty much the entire Zelda franchise. So, just what do I mean when I say the timeline is fake? Nintendo would know their own series, wouldn't they? Well, I'm not saying Nintendo is wrong, per se. I'm saying the timeline is wrong, Nintendo knows it's wrong, and they're lying when they say this is the official timeline. Why do I say that? Well, let's take a look. So according to the Hyrule Historia, Skyward Sword is first, followed by Minish Cap. Right off the bat, we have a problem. This is impossible. There's no way Minish Cap can be after Skyward Sword, because Minish Cap has absolutely no references to the Triforce, Master Sword, or the Hero of Legend. All things the game would logically contain if it took place after Skyward Sword. The Master Sword is first created during Skyward Sword. If Minish Cap took place after that, then why is Link using the Picori Sword instead? The only reason why Link wouldn't be using the Master Sword in Minish Cap is because the Master Sword hasn't been created yet. Furthermore, Minish Cap features no references whatsoever to the Triforce, which was discovered during the events of Skyward Sword. Instead, Minish Cap's villain, Vaati, is after something called the Light Force, a mysterious power that dwells solely within Princess Zelda. Why would the villain be after that instead of the much more powerful Triforce? The only explanation is because he doesn't know about the Triforce, because it hasn't been discovered yet, because that happens after Minish Cap during the events of Skyward Sword. There's also the small detail of the Hero of Legend's iconic outfit. Every single game in the series, except Minish Cap, tells us that the Hero of Legend has always been said to wear a green tunic and green cap. Eslo, the Picori mage who is transformed into a hat-like creature by Vaati, is the source of the hero's green cap. And since every other game features the green cap as a long since established part of the hero's clothing, like this is just what the hero has always worn, the game where the cap originates must be first. Moving down the timeline, we see that Four Swords is after Minish Cap. This is correct, just both games should come before Skyward Sword. Just like Minish Cap, Four Swords has no mentions of the Triforce, Master Sword, or the Hero of Legend, so it has to come before Skyward Sword. In addition, we see the return of the main villain from Minish Cap, Vaati. Vaati isn't immortal or ageless or anything, so for him to appear again in Four Swords, it must take place fairly soon after Minish Cap, at the very least within one lifetime. There's also the fact that the main weapon of the game, the Four Sword, shares the duplication powers of the fully powered up Picori Sword. Looking directly after Skyward Sword, we see that the official timeline says Hyrule Kingdom established. But during Skyward Sword, we see Link travel from his home in the clouds down to the surface where he finds the ruins of Hyrule Kingdom. Locations such as the various springs, the sealed grounds, and even the Temple of Time. How can the Hyrule Kingdom be established after Skyward Sword when it's already present during Skyward Sword? Another issue is this entire fork of the timeline that's supposedly what happens when the hero is defeated during Ocarina of Time. If the hero is defeated, that means the end of the world. If Ganondorf were to defeat Link, he would obtain all three pieces of the Triforce and become omnipotent, a god. It would be the end of all reality, all life. How exactly are 7 of the series games supposed to take place in a branch of the timeline where the entire world was destroyed? The whole concept of a hero is defeated fork in this timeline proves all on its own that the official timeline has to be fake. This section also says Ganon is resurrected next to A Link to the Past, even though it claims that Ganon won at the end of Ocarina of Time. If the hero was defeated, Ganon was never slain, and if he was never slain, he can't be resurrected. Can't resurrect someone who isn't dead. The official timeline also states that Ganondorf turns into Demon King Ganon before the timeline split. Ganondorf only becomes Ganon on the adult fork of the timeline. On the child fork, Ganondorf is caught, sentenced to death, and banished to the Twilight Realm before he can gain power, and he never transforms into Ganon. So it's incorrect to say it happens here, before the split, because that would mean it's true on both forks of the timeline. There's also the placement of Wind Waker. The official timeline has it coming directly after Ocarina of Time on the adult branch of the timeline, but really, there should be several games in between. First, we already know that A Link to the Past comes directly after Ocarina of Time. We know that A Link to the Past doesn't fall on the child fork of the timeline, And since we've already established that the hero is defeated fork of the timeline is just plain impossible and doesn't even make sense as a concept, the adult timeline is the only place it can fit. So rather than going straight from Ocarina of Time to Wind Waker, the timeline should have a Link to the Past in between. A Link Between Worlds is explicitly stated to be a direct sequel to A Link to the Past, and Triforce Heroes is similarly stated to be a direct sequel to A Link Between Worlds, so those two should also go in between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker. However, given the fact that those two games came out after the Hyrule Historia was published, we'll give Nintendo a pass on that one. What we won't give them a pass on, however, is the other 6 games that come in between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker. The official timeline says that Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons take place after A Link to the Past, with A Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes in between, presumably. And they're correct about that. Just not about which fork it's on. So boom, those two go in between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker as well. We also know that Link's Awakening is a direct sequel to the Oracles games, since the ending of the Oracles, where Link sets sail on a raft, and the beginning of Link's Awakening, where Link gets caught in a storm on a raft, are literally the same cutscene, meaning that Link's Awakening starts directly after the Oracles ends. So we stick Link's Awakening in before Wind Waker as well. Four Swords Adventures has to take place after Link's Awakening by process of elimination, because there's quite literally nowhere else it can actually fit. I'll go into more detail on why that is in a later video. Then there's the original 1986 Legend of Zelda and its direct sequel, The Adventure of Link, so those have got to go in before Wind Waker as well, and wow, would you look at that. We've gone from 0 games in between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker to 9 games in between. After Ocarina of Time, it says Ganondorf sealed, but then right before Wind Waker it says Ganondorf is resurrected. Again, if he was sealed rather than killed, he would be getting released, not resurrected. Another issue is that in between Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, it says New Continent Discovered, even though the continent where New Hyrule is located in Spirit Tracks is somewhere we've definitely seen before, not a new continent at all. Where exactly is it? Well, that's a story for another video. So let's recap. The official timeline gets the placement of Skyward Sword wrong by claiming a game where the Master Sword doesn't exist yet comes after the game where it gets created. It claims that Hyrule Kingdom was established after the events of a game where we visit Hyrule Kingdom. It claims multiple times that Ganon was resurrected at a time when he wasn't dead. It has a superfluous third timeline fork that ignores the entire concept of a game over and what would happen if Ganondorf won, forgets when Ganondorf's first transformation into Ganon occurred. It leaves out 9 different games in between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, even though there's literally nowhere else those games could fit on the timeline, and pretends that a location we've definitely seen before is somehow brand new. All in all, I think it's pretty clear, given the evidence, that this timeline can't be the real one. 1 or 2 inconsistencies could be waved away or excused, but this amount of errors, misplacements, and contradictions is just too much to ignore. But that still leaves the question, why would Nintendo release a fake timeline? Well, long before the Hyrule Historia was ever written, Nintendo got constantly asked about the timeline. You couldn't get through an interview, press release, or game announcement without somebody asking the likes of Iwata, Aonuma, Miyamoto, or others, hey, what's the real timeline? And eventually they just got sick of it. It was a red herring, a distraction, a ruse, an intentional fake meant to lead gamers off the trail. As a bonus, they probably figured that eventually some people would figure out that the timeline was fake, which would lead to more discussion and buzz and word of mouth about the series and free publicity for them. I mean, this entire video only exists because of the fake timeline. And here I am, giving them free advertising just by talking about it. But now it's your turn to talk about it. Do you agree with my analysis? Do you think the Hyrule Historia timeline is real? Are there any issues with the timeline that I missed? Comment below and let me know what you think. And hey, if you like what you saw here today, please do tell me. This channel is just getting started, so it'd be really great to get some feedback on what people did or didn't like. And if you think you might like to see more videos like this, or you want to be sure to catch my next video where I go over what the real timeline is, consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you'll be sure to catch my next video. Anyway, thank you for watching, this has been So You Think You Know, and now you do know.